Up in New York starts right now. Hey, Ed.
Brett, good to see you again. Got a lot breaking tonight. Trump derangement syndrome seems to be spreading overseas. Turns out not even combat zones are immune from this horrific disease. There was a time in America when we were told politics at least ended at the water's edge. Yet now Democratic lawmakers, some in the media, have found yet another way to slam President Trump. First, they went after him for not going to the battlefield. Then he and the First Lady paid a holiday visit to our troops in Iraq, and the critics quickly pivoted to more attacks over a nice gesture.
Deeply disappointing is that when he went to Iraq, he used it as an occasion to advance his specific policy objective, his new policy to withdraw from Syria.
The president seems to have confused in some way this troop visit with a campaign rally by raising things like the border wall and things that he's done for them.
Our nation's hall monitors are also mad that the president signed some MAGA hats, forgetting perhaps that then Senator Barack Obama signed a few autographs of his own for the troops back during the 2008 campaign. Guess what? We have the tape. Good evening, everybody. I'm Ed Henry, in again for Martha MacCallum. More on the growing backlash over that petty criticism in moments, but first, that same nastiness is infecting the battle over funding for the wall on our southern border. Breaking tonight, a top Republican says, quote, the needle has moved toward a very long shutdown. That remark, made to Fox News a short time ago by Congressman Mark Meadows, signals not just that the shutdown is very likely to extend into the first week of January or maybe longer. Take a listen to just how personal some of the Democratic attacks on the president have gotten.
We ought to work at it until we get to an agreement where a majority say yes. And I think we had that. Until the president, went off his meds, and who the hell knows what happened.
Off his meds, wow. With all this obvious animus towards the president, are negotiations even possible at this point, especially since some of the loudest voices against the wall, yes, they voted for barriers in the past. That hypocrisy not lost on the president, who tied some of it to former President Obama a little earlier today, retweeting this 2011 message in which Obama called for, yes, a crackdown on illegal immigration. That's where we begin tonight. In a moment, we'll get the state of play from a leading Republican pushing for the wall. But we kick things off tonight out west with Jonathan Hunt, live in our West Coast newsroom. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening to you, Ed. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen says the immigration system is at breaking point. Border Patrol agents say they're overwhelmed. Around 1,000 immigrants have been released onto the streets of El Paso, Texas this week alone. And 2 young immigrant children have died after being taken into custody by CBP. The first deaths of children in CBP custody for a decade. As for the El Paso situation, Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials say they have little choice but to release the immigrants there because of, quote, decades of inaction by Congress that they say has limited their ability to remove families who are in the U.S. illegally and set limits on how long they can hold those families. So they're being dropped off at a bus station in El Paso where aid groups are offering support. More, by the way, are expected to be released today.
They have spent 8 to 10 days in cells. Now they've been released. What we've been doing as a community is to support them, giving them food, a place for them to stay at night.
President Trump has repeatedly said the era of so-called catch and release has ended, but that is exactly what is happening in Texas right now. And it all comes against the backdrop of the government shutdown over President Trump's demand for a border wall that he says could stem the flow of illegal immigration. Now, some conservative commentators have pointed out that many Democrats supported the 2006 Secure Fence Act, which mandated 600 miles of fencing along the nearly 2,000-mile border with Mexico, and the 2013 immigration reform bill that called for 700 miles of pedestrian fencing. But consensus, as we know, Ed, almost impossible to find right now. And a fence, of course, is physically and symbolically different to a wall. The Berlin fence would have sounded very different to the Berlin Wall. And Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this fence, would have sounded very different to Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. So if there is to be some sort of consensus in the future, Ed, it may turn on language on building and most especially talking about fences and barriers rather than walls. Ed?
Jonathan Hunt, appreciate that report. Let's now go to our next guest, who represents a border state and says Democrats must, quote, bite the bullet and pay for the wall if they want to stop this problem and want to finally end the shutdown. He's Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs. He joins me live right now. Congressman, good evening.
Good evening, Ed. How are you doing?
I want to start out in good to see you. I want to start out in California, where Jonathan Hunt is. There's a police officer who lost his life in the middle of this Christmas season, gunned down. Officer Ronald Singh, as you know. You can see his image right now, and he was gunned down by an illegal immigrant. There's a manhunt at this hour, still trying to track down this illegal immigrant, right in the middle of this shutdown debate.
Yeah, you know, the problem is my heart goes out to the officer and his family. I wish this was an isolated incident. It's not so much. I mean, the problem is we have Angel Families. It's an organization of parents and loved ones of people who have been killed by illegal aliens. We have got to stop that. We've got to get it under control. And I hate to sound like I'm politicizing this, because I'm not, because I really have tremendous sympathy for this officer. But we have got to step it up as a Congress of the United States and get this border wall built, because it's the first step at restoring national security on this issue.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Congress, because leaders in both parties certainly bear some blame here. We're going to get to each side. Let's start with the Democrats, because of what I mentioned with the president's tweet a short time ago. It's rare this president quotes Barack Obama, but he quotes that tweet from 2011 where Barack Obama, in a State of the Union address, this wasn't just some throwaway, said we finally need to do something about cracking down on illegal immigration. That's 2011. What in the world have the Democrats done for the last 7 years?
They've done nothing, actually, and they've made it worse. They've gone, if you realize in what they've done, they've gone completely 180 degrees opposite. They want open borders. They have supported legislation to authorize sanctuary cities throughout the country, and they've just gone completely to the left wing of their party. And I just think it's antithetical to what most Americans want, because we know we need the security and we know we need to change our immigration laws, but we have to enforce those laws. But before you get to that, you have to secure your border, and the best way to do that is a wall barrier, a wall, actually.
And in fact, Jonathan just mentioned two different bills. One of them in 2013, it was the so-called Gang of Eight bill, in which over 60 Democrats and Republicans in the Senate voted for this, including Chuck Schumer, all kinds of other folks. It had 700 miles of, they called it fencing. But why the flip-flop now? They were for fencing, walling, whatever you want to call it, in 2013, but not now.
Well, it's real simple. I've talked to some of my friends who are Democrats. This is not about border security, I don't believe. I think this is ultimately, they do not want Donald Trump to get a victory. It was a linchpin to the Trump campaign. Republicans ran on this, part of our platform. And you know what? I just don't believe that they think that this is a good thing to do for politics. And I really have a problem with that, because that's placing politics above the safety and security of this country.
All right, Congressman, I said I was going to come after both parties. So I mentioned what the Democrats have done or not done in recent years. What about the Republicans? Now, the Democrats defend those previous votes for the wall in part by saying they were getting something. They didn't really necessarily want a wall, but they were getting a path to citizenship for millions of illegals who are in the country now. I see the president now saying, I want $5 billion in funding to get the government back open, $5 billion for the wall. What are the Democrats getting?
Well, the Democrats are getting the one thing that they should be most happy about, and that's immigration security, border control, border security. And that leads to additional discussions on immigration reform. That's what they really want.
But, Congressman, pardon me, you and I both know that's not what Nancy Pelosi's priority is. That's not what Chuck Schumer's priority is. So what I'm trying to get at is the president promised to the campaign the art of the deal, right? And so part of the deal is he gets something, in this case $5 billion. Why would Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer sign off on something where they're basically getting nothing?
Well, I think that you have to realize that there's a significant number of Democrats in this country that want border security. This is not to the broad Democrat Party that she's playing and that Chuck Schumer's playing to. They're playing to a narrow edge of their party, and that narrow edge says we want open borders. When you look at it, the people who are from independents and Democrats who voted for Donald Trump, they voted for him, and he got the Republican Party nomination, but the Democrats also voted for him when he started saying we're going to secure the border, we're going going to build a border wall, or we're going to enforce our laws. When he did that, all of a sudden the Rust Belt states that have been particularly hard hit by illegal immigration came to them. This would be a win for Democrats, in my opinion.
So I got less than 30 seconds, Congressman. Well, what's the win then? How do we get there? Because my understanding is the president's offered to come down from the $5 billion, somewhere in the range of $2.5 to $3 billion. How do you get the Democrats to yes?
Well, right now they're dug in. At some point, their base is going to have to come to them and say, "Look, we want the government open." That's why the government shutdown is a leverage right now. You're not going to get there at this point because right now Chuck Schumer has said we're not going to move off where we've been. That's why I think Mark Meadows said today it's going to take longer. It's going to take longer.
Congressman Andy Biggs, Happy New Year to you a little bit early. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. You too.
All right, here now, Lauren Claffey, Republican strategist, former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs to the Department of Homeland Security, and Brian Dean Wright. He's a former CIA officer, and a Democrat. Welcome to both of you. Appreciate you both coming in.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Lauren, let's pick it up where the congressman led off, which is what would the Democrats get in a deal? What do you see them actually getting moving forward?
So I think that at this stage, the Democrats aren't getting too much, right? The president's asking for a lot. And from what I've heard, there hasn't been any real offers. You hear about them offering perhaps additional expansion or permanent status for the temporary protected status TPS recipients that the administration has slowly been eliminating. You hear them, we just heard the congressman say that maybe they would get the government open again. I think that that's not nearly enough. And if I'm Nancy Pelosi, I have a week until I get the House in my control. Why am I negotiating on anything right now?
Sure. And Brian, when you get out of the politics, though, that may be good for Nancy Pelosi to wait and try at the beginning of January to open up and look like a hero. But I just mentioned we have a cop killer on the loose right now in California who's an illegal immigrant.
Look, the broader issue, including the gentleman that we are now trying to find, is that we have 1,000 to 3,000 people crossing the border every single day, both uninvited and unvetted. And so there is a critical requirement by our Congress to solve this, because every day we don't, we are increasing the risk of folks that are bringing themselves into this country, their families, their children, who we have seen 2 of them die. So this is a humanitarian issue, this is a security issue, and this is ultimately an economic issue, because a lot of these folks are coming into the country, they're taking jobs that in turn depress the income, that is the wages, of people who are already here. So this is a big problem that we need to solve, not just because it's a wall or a fence, but because it ties into so many other things.
Yeah, and Lauren, what about the Democrats here who, I mentioned Barack Obama, 2011, President Trump retweeted that today, talking about cracking down on illegal immigration. Bill Clinton did it in a State of the Union address as well, many years before that, and yet Democrat after Democrat now are against the wall.
That's mostly because the wall has become this symbol, right, for this populist anti-immigrant sentiment that they think that the president harbors, racist views, et cetera. And what's lost in this conversation is when you say wall, physical barrier, fencing, other things, it's not actually what CBP says that they need. Most of the time when the Democrats have said that they would support border security, it's more personnel at the border, CBP officers, it's additional technology like drone or other surveillance. It's tools that CBP can use to get operational control of the border. And that's what Democrats have traditionally supported in the past. And usually they've supported it in conjunction with some form of pathway to legal citizenship for the illegal population that's already in the United States. So when we talk about the Democrats were for this, like, for example, with the Gang of Eight bill, the Gang of Eight bill included massive provisions to increase legal immigration. So they were getting a huge benefit to supporting border security, which at that time was a non-political, easy thing for them.
Brian, I've got 30 seconds. To Lauren's point, why is it that Democrats in your own party, you are pretty tough in saying we need to crack down on illegal immigration, but why are there other Democrats who fall back on what she said, which is that the president's a racist for wanting to do something that a lot of Americans think is actually common sense?
Well, first, we find Trump distasteful. That is the progressive side of the party. In fact, so distasteful that people refer to him as Hitler. So you're not giving the party or people in Congress that space to have those negotiations. Look, the second piece is our party has drifted hard left. on this issue regarding the activists because of identity politics. We need to rebuild a base because we have abandoned rural America. We have really given up some of those traditional blue-collar voters.
Yeah.
So we're rebuilding with urbanites and people of color, and those are really the two big reasons why politically we don't want this, at least the DC elites and the media, don't want to give President Trump a deal.
Well, you're being honest about it. We had Ed Rendell, a former DNC chair, on this program last night. He was insisting the party has not drifted to the left. We'll see. We'll let the people decide. We've got a big election coming up in 2020. Brian, Lauren, we appreciate you both coming in.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
All right. First, the president was attacked for not going to visit troops overseas. Then he visited them, and guess what? Some are still not satisfied. Iraq War vet Amber Smith and former Obama official Marie Harf, they debate the legitimacy of the latest attacks on the commander-in-chief. That's next.
No, he stole Christmas.
Instead of being positive with the troops, there is no military more capable and now more lethal, more fearless, and more skilled than the United States Armed Forces. You are the warriors who defend our freedom. You are the patriots who ensure the flame of liberty burns forever bright. That's who you are. That's who you are.
Well, after initial inaccurate criticism that the president was not going to visit the troops overseas, it seems some in the media still are not satisfied. They're blasting the president's first trip to a combat zone for everything he did wrong while there.
He's like the Grinch. Instead of, I'm being honest.
No, he stole Christmas.
Instead of being positive with the troops, saying this is about the troops, it's not about me. You want positivity when it comes to Christmas. It is perplexing. Why would he visit the troops and do that?
Look, I think it's important that the president goes and visits the troops, but he's doing this backwards.
Right, it is, in fact, a campaign slogan. That is a campaign item, and it's completely inappropriate for the troops to do
Not
this.
supposed to do it.
But look, the president has to take some ownership of this, too. Every time he's around military audiences, he tends to politicize it, and he brings in complaints and grievances from outside the realm of military policy.
Well, as you can imagine, a few moments ago, the president decided to fire back, tweeting CNN and others within the fake news universe were going wild about my signing MAGA hats for our military in Iraq and Germany. If these brave young people ask me to sign their hat, I'll sign. Can you imagine me saying no? We brought or gave no hats, as the fake news first reported. He was referring to how some suggested perhaps he brought the hats. Amber Smith is a former Army pilot and Pentagon official, now a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. And Marie Harf, of course, is a former State Department and CIA spokesperson, now a Fox News analyst. Good evening, ladies.
Hello, Ed. Good evening.
Amber, the president was being criticized for not going, then he goes, and all of a sudden he's the Grinch.
I think this is a new low for media personalities and a news network to go after U.S. troops who are fighting in a combat zone right now with the sole purpose of hurting President Trump. When I first heard this news breaking, I said, this is absolutely fantastic. Republicans, Democrats, Americans, we can all get behind this because there is literally nothing negative about the commander-in-chief going to visit troops who are in harm's way. And so this is real life for them. Every single day, they're going out on missions that are extremely dangerous. So they're not sitting there behind a desk in Washington, D.C. researching the latest on political policy out of the Department of Defense. They're wondering if they're going to make it home tonight and if their buddy is going to too. So I think this criticism is absolutely ludicrous, and they just want to criticize the president to criticize him.
Yeah.
President Trump could cure cancer and they would still find something negative about it.
I've heard that one before, and you might be right after this latest criticism, because Marie, even USA Today wrote an editorial, they were fair, and they said, look, for Trump to take time away from his own holiday at home to visit with combat deployed troops reminds them America has not forgotten. Politics aside, what's important is a simple fact that he showed up. Why is that not good enough?
Well, I think it's a good thing that the president went to visit the troops. Finally, he should have done it sooner, but I think it's a good thing, Ed, and I think he gets credit for that. And some of the criticism goes too far. But I will say on 2 points, it is absolutely fair to criticize the president. He told lies, basically. I'll just say it. He said things that were not true to the troops about the fact that he said he was the first president to give them a pay raise in several years. That is not true. He said he gave them a pay raise of 10%. That is also not true. It is absolutely fair to criticize that. He also did, as you heard John Kirby say on another network, and let me tell you, I know John Kirby, he is not a liberal Democrat. He's probably not even a Democrat, as far as I know. He said that the president bringing in issues that are domestic political issues like the wall, going after Nancy Pelosi, that substance is not appropriate, and that is fair to criticize.
Okay.
I think that's absolutely fair to bring up.
I think you make a fair point about the pay raise. I'm not quite sure why the president keeps repeating that. But you're making the case now that this was about politics and somehow it was wrong for the president to inject politics. Here's one of your former bosses, President Barack Obama. I wanted to play this clip. December 6th, 2016, talking to the troops. By the way, that's the picture of him signing autographs in 2008 that I mentioned earlier. So he signed autographs as well, whether it's right or wrong. Both sides have done it. Barack Obama was trying to be nice to the troops. So was President Trump. I'm not sure why that criticism. But then on your point about politicizing things with the troops, here's what Barack Obama said to the troops.
The United States of America is not a country that imposes religious tests as a price for freedom. The United States of America is not a place where some citizens have to withstand greater scrutiny or carry a special ID card or prove that they're not an enemy from within. We're a country that has bled and struggled and sacrificed against that kind of discrimination and arbitrary rule. In other words, we are a nation that at our best has been defined by hope and not fear.
Marie, he said this in December after Donald Trump had been elected. Never used his name. You and I both know he was going after Donald Trump.
But I would say President Obama was very careful not to go after specific political opponents or political members of the other party. He did not use their names. He was talking about ideals.
He didn't use his name, but he said we can't have a religious test. Pardon me. He's talking about the Muslim ban. You and I know that. He's attacking Donald Trump.
Look, he was talking about ideals that he believes are important to all Americans, okay? Donald Trump went to a military base and started talking about Nancy Pelosi and the shutdown and Democrats being responsible and told things to the troops that were not true about their pay raises. I don't care if he signs hats. Ed, I don't care if he signs hats. I don't care if he signs hats, but there's a fundamental difference between what he did and what Barack Obama did in that clip you just played.
Go ahead, Amber. You've been patient.
The clip that you just showed, Ed, just shows the hypocritical nature of the media when it comes to the president. Let me tell you what matters to those troops who are on the ground in Iraq, some of who have been in Syria and who are back in Iraq now. They care about their commander-in-chief who came to visit them. And you want to know why? Because him visiting them in country, in the war zone, says that they matter, that they are recognized and they are remembered by the American people. And so that's what they're going to take away from this, that the commander-in-chief took time out of his holiday schedule and came over into a combat zone to see them. That is what matters. And so when people are away from their families during the holidays, that's what they're going to remember, not a side comment about politics.
Marie, I pressed you on that with the tape. I want to give you the last word. I got less than a minute, but I want to be fair and give you the last word.
I am glad the president went to visit the troops. I think that going into the new year, we as a country need to take a hard look at what our policy is in Syria, what it is in Iraq, who the next Secretary of Defense is going to be. These are bigger questions than political fights over a visit to troops, which I think he was right to do. And I hope that the National Security Team is having those discussions right now, because these are really important decisions we have to get right.
At that point, we can all agree some major national security decisions ahead in 2019. Marie, Amber, thanks for both coming in. Happy New Year.
Thanks, Ed.
Happy New Year, Ed.
All right. You too. From a record low to a record high, just a couple of days. The markets have been all over the place this month. You talk about 2019 and people wondering what's next. What does it mean for your wallet and the state of the economy and the state of the president's political standing? We're going to get into that with our Wall Street Journal panel. They're here to answer your questions next. Yet another wild ride on Wall Street today. After being down more than 600 points early in the day, the Dow staged a comeback in the afternoon, rallying more than 850 points to close up 260. Continuing a stretch of historic volatility in the final days of 2018, leaving many to wonder what lies ahead. And so now we want to give you an idea about your 401k, among other things. Joining me now, Wall Street Journal editorial board members Mary O'Grady and Dan Henninger, also a Fox News contributor. Good evening to both of you.
Good to be with you, Ed.
Hi, Ed.
Mary, ladies first, what in the heck is going on?
Well, I think most of this volatility I would chalk up to program trading, algorithms, and so forth. It's not any one individual or groups of individuals who decide that they're all going to sell, like in a movie. Sell. It's really triggered by this program trading. But at the end of the day, stocks are priced off of earnings and earnings multiples. And there's a lot of nervousness in the market about what's going to happen next year. We're in a long-term growing economy, and eventually we're going to hit a recession. Interest rates are going up. I don't think you can argue that the Fed increase in December can explain any of this, but the market knows that rates are going to be higher next year, and that means that it's the end to free credit, which we had during the Bernanke years, and that will change the equation in terms of earnings. And I think that's shifted sentiment a little bit. People are a little bit more nervous.
Dan, Mary makes a lot of good points, one of them being about earnings, but to sort of decipher it for our viewers, I thought I heard Kevin Hassett, one of the president's economic advisors, of course, say that earnings are the mother's milk, and this is really important. And he claims, at least, earnings have been good and are going to continue being good. Is he wrong?
No, well, they'll be good. I think the current estimates are they're going to come back a little bit from the predictions that people were making about a month ago, which kind of raises Mary's point of how sustainable the recovery is and the growth is going into 2019 and beyond into 2020. I mean, in your introduction, just before the commercial break, you said, what does it mean for people's wallets? I think the answer to that is hold on to your wallets. I mean, that's what the big money's doing on Wall Street. They are sitting on a lot of cash. They're waiting to see the bottom of this market. They don't know where it's going to be. Markets love predictability, and the watchword now is unpredictability. Anywhere you turn. I mean, even the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, the president has talked. There's been rumors about the president wanting to fire Jerome Powell, and people like Kevin Hassett have had to come forth and say, no, the president will not fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve. That just introduces a lot of unpredictability into market calculations, Ed.
So, Mary, on that point, there's also political volatility. We were just talking about James Mattis is stepping down as defense secretary. That might have roiled the markets a bit. But when our viewers hear algorithms and the Fed and earnings, to Dan's point, what does it mean for their wallet? How do you figure all this out?
Well, behind the scenes, I mean, you do have policy implications of the trade war if it gets worse, and you also have the shutdown, which if it drags on, it's going to cost the economy. But I think the main problem here is that we don't know how much free money for so many years under the Bernanke and Janet Yellen Fed, how much did that inflate financial assets to levels that maybe they shouldn't be at in a real world? I mean, it's an artificial world you have where, you have negative interest rates and you have this, what we call quantitative easing, all this extra cash sloshing around. So when we come back to reality, what are those financial assets worth in a world where you actually have to pay for credit? We don't know that.
Dan, last point. I've only got about 15 seconds, unfortunately, but the president's been upset.
Keep in mind, we're talking about the stock market. Kevin Hassett makes the argument that the real economy is strong, and it is. There's a lot of people getting jobs today. Wages are rising. And in terms of those pocketbooks, we're on pretty solid ground right now.
All right. An optimistic note to end it as we head into 2019. Dan and Mary, appreciate you coming in.
Sure.
Good to be with you.
All right. She supported Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court and faced death threats at the time. Well, months later, she's still being shamed for that vote. The latest attack against Republican Senator Susan Collins that you're not going to believe. That's next.
My job as a United States Senator is to apply my best judgment. And that's what I did in this case, despite tremendous pressure, horrible tactics, abuse of my family, my staff, and myself. I have been alarmed and disturbed, however, by some who have suggested that unless Judge Kavanaugh's nomination is rejected, the Senate is somehow condoning sexual assault. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Senator Susan Collins, of course, addressing the controversy surrounding then Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh in what supporters argue was a thoughtfully prepared speech based on facts. Collins would go on to vote yes on sending Kavanaugh to the nation's highest court, yet she continues to be attacked for that vote. Just this week, the Huffington Post accusing her of this year's, quote, most shameful hijacking of feminism, saying, quote, the shameful and shamefully effective cynicism of Collins' politicking is uniquely insidious in this insidious year. Just as shameful are the women who listened to her speech and nodded along. Well, Ash Scow is senior editor at the Daily Wire. She read it, as did I, and seems like was pretty concerned with that conclusion. Ash, appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
I thought part of the Me Too movement was that when there's a strong woman who has the guts to either speak out or specifically in this case is a senator who has a vote on any issue and decides to vote her conscience, we should support that.
Right. I mean, that's what ultimately you would think would be the movement. But as we've learned since it has come to fruition is that basically it's you have to toe the liberal line. You can't just simply be a woman. You must be a liberal woman. And so now Collins is getting attacked for this. And what she's essentially getting attacked for is standing up for due process and evidence and the presumption of innocence, you know, basic tenets of our justice system.
Yeah, which in the end prevailed for Kavanaugh because he was confirmed. But here we are. It's being relitigated again. And Huffington Post went on in this piece to say, quote, she painstakingly, they allege, attempted to explain using debunked junk science, disregarding any credible neuropsychology about how trauma affects memory. They're obviously talking about Christine Blasey Ford and her testimony, and they're attacking Collins.
Right. So the debunked junk science, I don't even know what she's referring to because most of the statistics revolving around today's current sexual assault epidemic, as we're told there is one, that's junk science. It's self-reported surveys that, broaden the definition of sexual assault so that pretty much anyone's a victim. And, there's respondents. There's all kinds of problems with these studies. But the bigger issue here is attacking Collins for standing up for due process. And, when you go after someone for that, I mean, you're basically saying that due process is the enemy of justice in this country. And, Christine Blasey Ford wasn't served well by the way all of these allegations came about either. I mean, here's a woman who something may have happened to her. She might be misremembering things. And these allegations thrust her into a position that she didn't initially want. And so due process and an actual,